for us. Do you think it is as neat a solution as atheists often claim, that if a multiverse exists, then fine-tuning problem just disappears?
But there are certainly physicists working on interesting multiverse models. So this is something that's kind of consistent with physics as we have it now.
Okay, we might not be able to talk about exactly when things begin to exist, and we're not sure if the universe began to exist in the right metaphysical sense, but let's use that as a segue to move on here. And we spent a lot of time on cosmological arguments, but I wanted, as promised, to cover a couple more, and maybe we can do them with a little bit more haste, because I think cosmological arguments are probably the most tricky and technical, especially in this format, to get into. But there's this other feature of the universe, whether it began to exist or not, which is that it seems to abide by some perfectly balanced and really finely attuned laws and principles and constants. So famously, this is called the fine-tuning problem, or the fine-tuning argument, or whatever you want to sort of label it. Now, we're talking here about things like the strength of gravity. We're talking about the expansion rate of the universe, the curvature of space-time, the strength of the strong and weak nuclear forces that hold atoms together. In principle, logically, it seems possible that gravity could be 2 times as strong. It could be that when you have an object of 1 kilogram mass, it just exerts twice the bending of space-time than it does in the actual world. That could have been the case. And the scientists have been telling us for years now that if that were the case, if gravity had been a little bit stronger, then the entire universe would have collapsed shortly after the Big Bang, right? Because the gravitational pull would have been too strong, and things would have collapsed in on themselves. If it had been any weaker, then everything would have flown apart so fast that planets couldn't form. And so this fine-tuning argument, I think, is often misrepresented. I think people think we're talking about the Earth is the perfect distance from the sun, which is pretty nice. But when you realize there are billions and billions of suns and billions of planets, one of them's going to hit. But we're talking here about the fabric of the universe itself, that if these constants had been ever so slightly different, basically nothing could exist short of maybe some hydrogen atoms or something like that. So the theist wants to look at this and say, this fine-tuning can only be explained in one of 3 ways. Chance, which seems exceedingly unlikely, given just how perfectly balanced these constants have to be. Necessity, they just had to be this way, but they certainly don't seem logically necessary, and we don't really have any good reason to suspect that they would be necessary. We don't have any sort of scientific law that says they have to be that way or something like that. And third is design. Somebody chose to make them that way so that the universe could come about, and no surprises which one they favor. So, having laid that out, what do you think?
So you're suggesting there are 3 options. Let's park design and talk about the other 2. Whether it's chance or not depends upon, I think, when exactly these values are fixed. Right? So one story that you could tell, one way that maybe the physics could play out, is that at some point there's something like a phase transition in the universe, and the values get fixed by the phase transition, and it's just like other things that happen in physics. This is going to be an indeterministic process, right? Suppose it goes that way. Well, now it doesn't matter what the numbers are. It doesn't matter what the probabilities are. Once you know that it's indeterministic, that it really was just a matter of chance, there's nothing left to worry about. It's like suppose we conquer the galaxies, right? Humans inhabit, and we build. Sort of every star has either a planet that we've colonized, or a set of planets that we've artificially constructed. And there are billions and billions and billions of galaxies, right? I'm underplayed how many there are, and we have a universal lottery in which every person on every one of the planets has a ticket. And it turns out that you have the winning ticket. And the odds are astronomically against you getting the winning ticket. But for reasons that I won't go into, we're quite confident that the lottery was won fair and square. But you shouldn't be worrying about the fact that it was so incredibly unlikely that you would get the winning ticket to think, it must have been rigged in my favour. it must have been that for what reasons unknown to me, that the organisers of the lottery decided that I was going to be the person that wins the big prize or whatever. So long as you're confident in the fairness of the process, the size of the number doesn't matter. And I think that analogy is going to carry over to the case of the fine-tuning of the constants, so long as we know that it was just the result of some phase transition in the universe. Okay, so that's the first point. You can't rule out chance as a satisfying explanation until you've ruled out the possibility that there was a phase transition of that kind, perhaps back before inflation. So it's physics that we don't know anything about yet.
Can you just clarify what you mean by a phase transition?
So I'm just thinking about something that happens that applies to the state of the whole of the universe, in which these various parameters get set to particular values. They were not set to these values earlier. Maybe it's because the universe wasn't, at that earlier point, wasn't characterized by those parameters. That's the kind of thing that I've got in mind.
The fine-tuning argument sounds impressive, but it leans on a huge assumption that we already know how these constants were set. We don't. Physics already shows us that phase transitions happen. The early universe went through symmetry breaking right after the Big Bang. During those transitions, values can settle naturally. That's not speculation. That's established physics. And quantum mechanics tells us randomness is built into reality at a fundamental level. So saying chance is impossible ignores modern science. Low probability doesn't equal design. Every lottery winner had insane odds too. The honest answer is simple. We don't yet have a full theory of early universe physics. God did it is not an explanation.
Right, the parameters now, have they always characterized the universe?
Yeah, who knows? I think sort of thoughts like that are quite plausible or intuitive. Yeah, I would think there's no way it's me that I've won the lottery. It's so unlikely, but someone had to win it, right? But it's that someone had to win it that I think is key here, because we've only got one universe that we know of, right? And people like to talk about a multiverse. That's kind of a version of the chance argument, but shelving that for the time being, there's just the one universe that we know about. And so it seems to me less like doing a big lottery with everyone in the universe and the person who wins is really, really surprised. It'd be more like sort of, I don't know, if in the same way that if I don't know how many like hands of poker are played every day, probably millions, online poker and casinos around the world, and probably a royal flush occurs every now and again, right? But I've got to say that if there were only like one game of poker that occurred, or one hand of poker that occurred, and it was a royal flush, and it was like the one time that it had happened, I would feel like less inclined to say like, oh, well, like had just as much chance with that hand as any other. It would feel a lot less easy. And so in other words, the intuitive force that someone had to win the lottery, it doesn't feel like some universe had to get the constants that they did, unless there is a multiverse. If the idea is just that, well, something can be unlikely, but as long as we know that it was due to chance, like it shouldn't be a problem, I still think that would be like a big problem for me. Like I find it very difficult to swallow that intuition for the universe, unless we're just talking about a multiverse, in which case it becomes trivially easy to say, yeah, some universe had to have these constants.
So in the case of the poker hand, that someone gets a royal flush is actually some evidence that there's some cheating going on, right, in general. If I was really, really confident that there couldn't possibly be any cheating going on, then the one deal and it comes up, well, fine, right? But so that's one thing. But the point about the analogy is just that it so easily could have happened that the cards came out differently and you didn't get a royal flush. And in the case of the universe, it could easily have happened on this telling of the story where there is just a kind of, I'll say random, even if it's not quite the right word, a random assignment of the values to the constants. It could easily have turned out that if it is the case, there's just one universe, the one universe that there is only lasted for a tiny fraction of a second or blew apart so rapidly that it never contained anything interesting. The thing to say would be, that's just the way it turned out. But that's it on the assumption that there's this kind of uniform random assignment of the values. Well, maybe not very likely, right? That the story about the random assignment of the the variables. That depends on physics stuff. I don't.
Well, do you think it is plausible? I just want to be clear on what you're saying here. Do you think it is just like plausibly true that there's only one universe and that it has the constants it has, and it could have had different constants, and they are like extremely, like finely balanced with a unbelievable degree of unlikelihood? Do you think it's plausible, like a sort of live option to just go, yeah, but it just so happened to be that way?
Sure. Just on analogy with so I happen to win the intergalactic lottery.
Yeah,
it's just, I mean, you can make the numbers in the intergalactic lottery as big as you like. You can make them rival the numbers in fine tuning argument. It doesn't change anything as far as I can see.
I see the lottery thing as more like the multiverse, because the way the lottery works is that there is a ticket that's going to win, right? I think it would be more like you run this really strange lottery where like you have to pick a series of 10 numbers, and it's not that like everybody gets a ticket and somebody's going to win. It's like there's only one player, right? Because there's only one universe. There's only one player, and they have to pick 500 million numbers in a random order. And I've written down 500 million numbers. And if you pick the right numbers, you're going to win the lottery. You're going to get $1 million. And the person just randomly guesses 500 million numbers in a row. And I go, oh gosh, like after however long it takes me to check them, I go, yeah, congratulations, you've won. Right? That seems to be more like the situation where there's one universe and those constants have to be exactly as tuned as they are in order for basically anything to exist. And it no longer becomes plausible to me for the person who won the lottery to go like, oh, well, I guess, it's...
So it depends. So what's the explanation for the numbers that they wrote down, right? What matters is the ruling out any other possible explanation. So, I agree that it seems massively implausible, but that's because you're starting to think, well, they must have cheated. They must be using cameras. There must be somebody with a microphone. They must have an earpiece, and someone's just dictating the numbers to them, or something like that. And that will be a more plausible hypothesis than the they just guessed them all. But the thought was, we rule all of that out, and then what's the option? You just accept it.
I suppose, and in fairness, in that case, like if I just knew that the person genuinely had just randomly chosen and just got unlucky, then yeah, I would just have to accept that as a matter of fact. But I suppose if somebody said that a live option, and for me, like when I look at fine tuning, like yeah, like God designing the universe is a live option for me. I don't think it's the true one. I don't have enough reason to think that's the case, but yeah, it's possible. Yeah, maybe God designed the universe. If my only other option, let's say, were chance, because that's the one we're considering right now, I think I would have to choose the God explanation, because it would be like if there were two explanations for how that person got that number. Either they randomly chose, or somebody had secretly, like psychologically, designed it so they picked those numbers. And I would, in a heartbeat, I would pick that second explanation. Yeah. And would you do the same?
Yeah. Well, I agree about that. I'm just thinking about can you rule out chance? Right. Absolutely. And at this stage, we haven't compared the other hypotheses, and so I just want to say, no.
Yeah. I think that's worth pointing out. And I think you're right at the very least that the chance thing just gets like brushed over, doesn't it? Like when people are talking about this, they go like, so it could be chance, but we know it's not that. So let's talk about, let's slow down. Let's take a moment. Let's think about it. Okay. So what about our other options here? We've sort of got necessity and design. At least that's the way that it's often painted. So are those our only remaining options?
So how are we going to classify multiverse, right? So there's of trials here, and the constants are just assigned randomly to an incredibly vast array of initial states of universes, and a few of them take off and the rest of them are spectacular failures. Is that necessity?
I typically say that that's a version of the chance, because you're saying that like, yeah, we find ourselves in a finely tuned universe just by chance, because this is like the lottery thing where there are like trillions and trillions, or maybe an infinite number of universes, and yeah, like of course by chance some of them are going to be finely tuned. But now I'm thinking about it, in a way it's also maybe a version of the necessity argument, because if there's a multiverse of every possibility, you want to say that like necessarily one of those is going to have finely tuned constants. So maybe it kind of sits outside and should be its own option. But yeah, I mean, it's probably the most popularly discussed response to this is the multiverse. So how we classify it, some people posit the existence of a multiverse in response to the fine-tuning problem. Others think they have other reasons to believe in a multiverse anyway, and then conveniently that sort of solves this problem for us. Do you think it is as neat a solution as atheists often claim, that if a multiverse exists, then fine-tuning problem just disappears?
So I think that it's an important question whether we have independent reason to believe that there's a multiverse or
Yes.
not. It seems like it's very expensive if you're postulating a multiverse just to explain the fine-tuning of the constants, theoretically expensive. So, but there are certainly physicists working on interesting multiverse models. So this is something that's kind of consistent with physics as we have it now. I don't know, because the cosmology of the early universe seems to be always in a state of incredible flux. So I don't know.
Much like the early state of the universe.
And here's where the lottery example actually starts to make sense. Critics say we only have one universe, so chance sounds ridiculous. But modern cosmology already considers the possibility that our universe may not be the only one. Inflation theory, supported by observations of the cosmic microwave background, allows models where many universes can form with different physical constants. If that's the case, then our universe having life-friendly values isn't shocking. It's the same reason someone wins the lottery when billions of tickets exist. And there's another issue people ignore. We don't even know if these constants have always characterized the universe. Early cosmology shows the universe changed dramatically in its first moments. During those transitions, physical parameters could have settled into different values. So before claiming design, we should admit the obvious. The physics of the early universe is still largely unknown.
We've got this multiverse thing going on. We've got this potential for chance. What about necessity, by which I want to say there's only one universe and there's just some reason why the constants had to be the way that they are by necessity? Do you think that's a plausible option?
So I think that that's a viable option. And if forced to choose between the three options that we're now discussing, it's probably the one that I like the most out of the three. But not that I'm enormously confident that it's the best one of the three to pick, or maybe that's not the right way to say it. Not that I'm not enormously confident that it's the correct answer. So a lot here turns on what you think about the metaphysics of modality. What's the story that you want to tell about necessity and contingency? And broadly speaking, there are two competing schools of thought. There's one school of thought that seems to think that basically our powers of conceivability tell us about the range of metaphysical possibility, right? So if we can kind of consistently conceive of something, then it's metaphysically possible. And if you're thinking about it that way, it seems very implausible to take the necessity route. There's a quite different approach to the metaphysics of modality, which I take it goes back to Aristotle, but there have been lots of people in the history of philosophy who've gone this way, who think that modality is grounded in the actual world. So somehow or other, the actual world determines what's possible. Now, the particular version of this that I want to go with is that possible worlds share some history with the actual world and diverge from it only as indeterminism, causal indeterminism, plays out differently. Now, if you've got, and you think that the constants were fixed always, so the values have always been the same, then it's a consequence of that view that the values of the constants are necessary. Right? There's no point in history where they could have taken on a different value. They've always taken on the value that they do, and there's no mechanism for changing them as the universe evolves. So there's no possible world where the values are different from how they are. So it turns out that they're necessary. That's the third position.
Yeah. Now, okay. So, and some other people will say that they have sort of a trust in this necessity argument in the sense that they're searching for this so-called theory of everything. You know, like if you could sort of solve science. Now, my regular listeners will know that I'm suspicious of the extent to which science can actually explain anything at all. I think it's a purely descriptive enterprise. But for those who, take an explanatory view of this, they say, okay, well, we haven't got there yet, but one day I'm sure we will unlock the key, which tells us there's one simple, equation or something which predicts or entails all of the constants as we currently have them. I think you'd still probably have a problem of like why that equation is the way that it is, but maybe when we get there, we'll see that it's self-justifying or something. And so, even though we don't have it, there's this idea that there is some necessary reason that we just haven't discovered yet. So, we've got some broad strategies here, and you said of the three that we've been discussing, your favorite is the necessity thing, not in that scientific way, but in the modality sense. But the way you caveated that by saying, of the options that we've got here, like, made me think, is there a response that you have to the fine-tuning problem that doesn't abide by these categories? Like, typically speaking, if somebody presents this argument to you, what is your actual view? Like yourself, you don't believe that the universe was finely tuned by a creator deity, so how do you sort of suspect we can account for the finely tuned constants?
So what I'm going to say is there's this range of options, and it's kind of, we aren't in a position to decide between them.
Sure.
Right? If you insist that I just answer the question and I'm only allowed to pick one, then I'm going to pick necessity. And I've written a couple of books where I try to elaborate the kind of worldview that I see as being based on this necessity answer. But and in those books, I don't say what I'm now saying, which is, okay, so this is where at every choice point I pick the view I like the most. But I'm not necessarily confident in the choices. So the overall worldview isn't one that I'm enormously confident in. It's just that at least it gives you a kind of complete worldview to discuss.
I was about to move on and try to wrap up with something on the ontological arguments. But just before doing so, I nearly forgot that every time I ever talk about fine-tuning or see it discussed on the internet, somebody comments about the puddle, who I can't remember which writer it is that talked about the puddle. It's like the person who goes, wow, I like how wonderfully designed the shape of the hole is for the water that fills it. Now, which is obviously a parody. The idea is you've mistaken the way round that this goes. It's not that the hole was designed for the puddle, it's that the puddle just fit the hole that happened to be there and gave the illusion of a perfectly sort of designed hole. And the reason I want to point that out is because I think that's a very clever sort of response to some versions of these design arguments, like the distance of the Earth from the sun and stuff like that. But I want to point it out because it kind of frustrates me when I see that, because when faced with the possibility that the universe as a whole could not have formed like molecules, it's not enough to say something like, oh, but it's a bit like seeing a puddle and thinking that the hole was designed for the... No, there's no water, there's no hole, there's no concrete, there's no helium, there's no anything. This strong version of the fine-tuning argument is not applying to, like, oh, well, like it's not like the sort of, oh, this thing looks designed a bit like a watch or something like that, or we're in the habitable zone. It's like the fabric of reality would not exist as you know it if these constants were not finely tuned. And so I just want to say that puddle analogy only applies to a very limited scope, I think, of so-called fine-tuning arguments, and it does not respond adequately, even closely adequately, to something which is about the existence of anything at all made of physical matter. There would be no water and no hole in the ground for it to fill if the constants weren't finely tuned. Anyway, I just want to say my piece. Unless maybe you have something to say on that.
Yeah. So I think that that's absolutely right. The kind of cosmic fine-tuning argument, the puddle analogy isn't any help at all. I have a suspicion that maybe Dawkins was the person who originated that analogy.
No, it was a fiction. It was a writer of fiction. I'll figure it out while you're speaking.
I'm not sure what else to add really at this point.
It was Douglas Adams, by the way.
Was too, actually.
It was Douglas Adams who came up with it. I'm not sure where exactly, but yeah, the puddle analogy. Imagine a puddle waking up one morning and thinking, "This is an interesting world I find myself in, an interesting hole I find myself in. Fits me rather neatly, doesn't it? In fact, it fits me staggeringly well. It must have been made to have me in it." And yeah, it's funny, it's clever, it's a good bit, but it's very limited in its scope.
The puddle analogy is very good for for responding to evolutionary arguments for design, because the evolutionary story tells you about how your features fit the world as it now is. Right?
Yes. Yeah, and that's where it's so genius, right? Is that like somebody who thinks, wow, look how brilliantly designed the human eye is to perceive, color and the environment and stuff. And the point here is like, no, like your eye evolved for the environment. It's not that the environment was designed for your eye or whatever. It just evolved to fit the space that it was in. And Douglas Adams here is giving a wonderful illustration of that by saying, The hole wasn't designed for the puddle just fit the environment in which it was in. That's right. But for some reason, I see this, like Douglas Adams quoted more in response to fine-tuning than to any evolutionary arguments, which is extremely strange because I think it just doesn't apply at all. It's just like a bit of a PSA to people listening. Like, think about it for a moment. That doesn't quite apply. Although I'm sure some of you have already commented it down below, and some of you may even think that despite what we've just said, it does still apply. And if you think that's the case, please do let us know why.
And here's something else people rarely address. When Christians argue the universe must be designed, they assume a perfect designer. But the Bible itself doesn't describe a universe that looks carefully engineered. Genesis says the earth was created before the sun and stars in Genesis 1:1-16. Modern astronomy shows the opposite. Stars existed billions of years before the earth formed. The Bible also presents conflicting accounts of creation. In Genesis 1, humans are created after animals. In Genesis 2, Adam appears before animals and Eve is created later. If the universe truly required precise divine tuning, you would expect the religious texts explaining that creator to be internally consistent and scientifically accurate. Instead, what we see looks exactly like what historians expect. Ancient human writers trying to explain the world with the knowledge they had thousands of years ago. So what do you think? Do you believe the universe was designed by a god, explained by unknown laws of physics, or maybe the result of chance in a much bigger cosmos? Let me know what you believe. Comment it down below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more discussions like this.